Dear Dad, I just missed meeting you. You died on September 11, 2001, and I was born 26 days later on October 7th.
Very smart child.
I want you to know that Mommy's doing a great job of loving me and raising me in a happy home. Every September 11th, we go to your firehouse, God 252, for a mass. We get to eat lots of donuts and see the fire truck. I see it every year, and every year I think it's so cool. I think it is really cool that you were such a brave firefighter and that you died saving lots of people's lives. I feel so proud of you. As I get older, everyone says I walk like you, run like you, and have your crazy sense of humor too. I play flag football in the same league as you and in the same position as you, quarterback. I really like when people compare me to you. Mommy got married again and I have a dad, a brother, and a sister. My dad plays sports with me and teaches me how to do things. I really love him. I know that you are in heaven and always watching over me. I love knowing that you are a hero. I wish I could have met you.
September 11, 2001, 8:46 a.m., a tragic moment in American history. Osama bin Laden's plan was to not only knock down the North and South Towers, but he also wanted to take down our country with it. Little did he know this terrorist attack strengthened and united the American people. Bin Laden's hatred towards the U.S. began due to the three essential reasons. The U.S. had troops in Saudi Arabia during the Persian Gulf War, the U.S. supported Israel, and the U.S. bombed and had sanctions in Iraq. Arabians hated the U.S. before bin Laden was even born. During the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Great Britain had promised both the Zionist Jews and Arabs their own land in Palestine in return for helping them in the war. After the war, the Zionists began to flood in Palestine where they had been promised land. When the Jews finally arrived to what they thought was their own land, the Arabs claimed that the land belonged to them as well. Great Britain had now realized they had themselves in a dangerous situation. Great Britain tried to stop the Jews from moving to Palestine, but the Jews continued to stay there. The Holocaust took place in 1993, where 12 million people were killed. 6 of those 12 million people were Jews. After this, the US and Great Britain knew the Jews needed their own homeland more than the Arabs because they needed a place to be safe. In 1948, the United Nations established Israel and Palestine. During this creation of a new country, the Palestinian Muslims were never consulted about this decision. The United States supported Jews who lived in Israel, which made Osama bin Laden very angry. This was because the Palestinian Muslims had been discarded and not cared about in this decision. The second reason for bin Laden's hatred towards America was because the US had troops in Saudi Arabia during the Persian Gulf War. After the war between Iraq and Iran, Iraq was in major debt and needed to recover. In 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait and threatened Saudi Arabia. If Saddam Hussein, the leader of Iraq, controlled the oil production of both Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, he would own about 25% of the world's oil production. The US did not want him to obtain this much power, so the US offered Saudi Arabia protection. The Mujahideen did the same. Saudi Arabia chose the US to protect them, and we sent thousands of troops into Saudi Arabia. This was called Operation Desert Shield. This angered Osama bin Laden even more now because Saudi Arabia had 2 of the most holiest Islamic cities in it, Mecca and Medina. This was the most offensive thing the US could do, put non-Islamic troops in the 2 most holy cities in all of Islam. This is when bin Laden really started to hate the US. Finally, the third reason bin Laden hated the US was because we bombed to put sanctions in Iraq. After Operation Desert Shield, Operation Desert Storm was put into action. This was an operation in which we invaded Iraq, liberated Kuwait, and ended the war. This took very few troops' lives, and then we put sanctions in Iraq. After everything was said and done, bin Laden began planning and executing attack after attack on the US and Great Britain. Once bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, a terrorist group bin Laden led, began attacking and killing civilians in the countries he hated, he planned an attack that would change our country forever. On September 11, 2001, an attack would occur on the US that would destroy historic buildings, a military base, and devastate a small farm town in Pennsylvania. The first of the attacks occurred on World Trade Center towers. The first plane crashed into the North Tower at 8:52 a.m., and then the second plane crashed into the South Tower at 9:03 a.m. While the world was in disarray in New York, 40 minutes later, a third plane smashed into the Pentagon at exactly 9:43 a.m. Finally, the fourth plane in this attack was set on the White House in Washington, D.C. However, the flyers on United Airlines Flight 93 decided to revolt against the hijackers and retake over the plane and make sure it didn't hit the White House. The passengers captured the hijackers and redirected the flight. It unfortunately crashed into a small town in Pennsylvania called Shanksville. The plane crashed at 10:03 In total, all the attacks killed 2,996 people. There is a much more complex meaning behind every target on 9/11. Firstly, the World Trade Center was targeted. The sole reason for this was because of the U.S. economical power. Bin Laden wanted to show the U.S. and the world that he could have our strong and powerful economy destroyed in minutes. Secondly, the Pentagon was targeted as a symbol of the U.S. military power. Again, it was targeted to show that he could have our military power destroyed with just an order from Osama bin Laden. Finally, the White House was targeted but not destroyed. This was a symbol for our political power. At this time, the U.S. was one of the most powerful countries in the world, and Osama bin Laden targeted specific things to show that the U.S. in fact aren't as strong as the country looks. After these tragic events, the aftermath took a great toll on the U.S. There were three main parts of the impacts that attacks had on us. The primary impact was the practical impact. Examples of this were airports becoming more secure. Billions of dollars went into making better security systems and detectors to show if anything could pose a threat to the passengers. Many were given hardened cockpit doors and air marshals on every plane. Because of the fear of flying, the airline industry almost completely collapsed. The government had to bail them out. The next impact was the psychological impact. This included Muslims being targeted as terrorists, as were their buildings, mosques, and institutions. This also included people being afraid of Muslims in general. If people became afraid of everyday Muslims, then the extremists had won. Other religions were targeted, such as Hindus and Sikhs. The final and largest impact was the health impact. Not only had nearly 3,000 people died, but also many died from the thousands of toxins left in the air. 13,000 workers and rescuers suffered from decreased lung function. The poisoned air reached all the way to Lower Manhattan and Chinatown. Much money was spent on healthcare that could have been spent on helping the U.S. in other ways. September 11th was both a horrifying and devastating day. Many lives were taken, and sorrow will present for many years to come because of one terribly devastating day.
The Soviet-Afghan War lasted from 1979 to 1988. The war was fought against the Mujahideen with the help of the U.S. Bin Laden was one of America's allies during this time. They wanted to weaken the USSR as much as possible. At the end of the Cold War, the USSR collapsed. The Mujahideen and Al-Qaeda believed that their god Allah helped them destroy the Soviets. They thought that they were very powerful and that they could take down America if there was ever a reason to attack. In 1993, the World Trade Center was bombed. The mastermind behind this attack, Ramzi Youssef, wanted to topple one tower onto the other, killing as many people as possible. Neither tower toppled over. However, 7 people died from this attack. In 1994, there was starvation in Somalia. The U.S., along with the help of the United Nations, intervened to provide aid. The U.S. started dropping crates of food and supplies from helicopters. Local warlords began to take the food and only give the food to others if they joined their group. Al-Qaeda started to help the warlords and attack the U.S. troops. Al-Qaeda shot down a helicopter, and that killed 17 U.S. troops. Al-Qaeda believed they defeated the U.S. and that the U.S. was easy to defeat. In 2000, Islamic extremists attacked a Navy ship called the USS Cole. The ship was refueling off the coast of Yemen when a boat full of suicide bombers was approaching the ship. This incident killed 17 and injured 39 Americans. After 11 years, the U.S. has changed immensely. The lives of loved ones lost in 9/11 will never be forgotten, and the scars left from that day will never heal. For the sake of all the lives lost in 9/11, we can never forget, and we will never forget. For those who sacrificed their lives to save many, we must live life to its fullest because they sacrificed so much for us. As President Obama said in his speech this year,
"But no matter how many years pass, no matter how many times we come together on this hallowed ground, know this, that you will never be alone. Your loved ones will never be forgotten. They will endure in the hearts of our nation because through their sacrifice, they helped us make the America we are today. An America that has emerged even stronger.
Did you stand there in shock at the sight?